The reality is the United States hadn't really thought the entire thing through too much. There was an emotional reaction to the explosion of the USS Maine.
In Havana Harbor on February the 15th, 1898, a mysterious explosion sank an American cruiser, the USS Maine. 266 officers and sailors were killed. Cuba was a Spanish colony 90 miles from Florida. Although there was no evidence of Spanish involvement, cries of revenge against Spain swept across America. But President William McKinley, who would lead America into the 20th century, was reluctant to go to war.
President McKinley is a silver-tongued orator, very popular, sweet man, but a very indecisive man. They used to say that McKinley's mind is like an unmade bed. You have to make it up for him before he can use it.
Much.
Okay, so the war is on. Boom, there it is. And once the war starts, it goes pretty darn well. As Secretary of State John Hay said, it's a splendid little war. It only lasted 3 months. It wasn't that expensive. Not that many Americans got killed, and it was totally victorious. Splendid little war. So what ended up happening is the United States Army, with great difficulty, took its soldiers on the rails down here to Tampa. I mean, it was just a mess on the rails down here. And you could see that the American government needed to really organize its generals better. Bottom line is the United States Navy quickly surrounded Cuba. They sunk almost the entire Spanish Navy quickly. I mean, the Spanish Navy had like old wood ships, and the United States Navy has steel, modern ships. They sink it there, and then they go ahead and they land soldiers down here in the southern part of Cuba. They march overland, and without too much trouble, go ahead and take the island of Cuba from the Spanish soldiers there. Right? More Americans die of yellow fever and malaria than die in combat. And without any opposition at all, the United States goes over here and takes Puerto Rico, which to this day is an American possession, a very close part of the American empire to this day, right? There was no fighting at all in Puerto Rico. So this happens very quickly, right? And the war is basically over before you know it, even though in many places you see lots of issues with regards to organization. Okay? And the most famous fighting in the entire thing is the charge up San Juan Hill by the former Undersecretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt, and his irregulars, his militia group called the Rough Riders, basically a bunch of cowboys from out west. They storm up this hill, they take it, and they make sure that the press sees it, and they become the most famous war heroes from this entire effort. Before he went ahead and resigned from the Navy Department, Theodore Roosevelt is a perfect example of this person who saw the future. The American empire, the sea lanes, control of the seas, empire, power, the United States competing with the Germans on the world stage, things like this. A big believer in imperialism and war, right, Theodore Roosevelt. He left instructions for Commodore Dewey of the American Navy in Hong Kong that said basically this: if you hear news that we declare war against Spain, open these orders. He opened them, and the order said, proceed to Manila Bay in the Philippines and destroy the Spanish Navy and take the Philippines, which he proceeds to do. He destroys the entire Spanish Navy in the Pacific Ocean in one morning. And it's not even a sporting fight. It's basically like shooting fish in a barrel. In fact, there was one scene where all these Spanish sailors are going to their deaths down to the ocean, and the Americans are clapping and whooping it up. And one of the commanders says, "Don't clap, boy. They're dying." Right? And for Commodore, it wasn't really about the Spanish. He was watching the Germans, because the German Navy was watching the American Navy do this. The Germans wanted to take the Philippines too, right? It's not really a matter of are the Spanish leaving? It's a matter of who's going to take their place. In reality, the Filipinos getting their own independent country is just not really on the map. Yeah.
But I thought Roosevelt gave up on his position as Navy.
He did.
But then why do you still follow that order?
Because he gave those orders before he quit.
So you have to follow
Those were sealed orders from before. This is before they had like wireless communications and cell phones.
Okay.
You sent these orders like months in advance, and they traveled with you across the world.
Okay, so he did not know that the order was not valid.
The order was valid. It was from the Undersecretary of the Navy. It had the full impetus of the U.S. government.
I think he means he wasn't an officer anymore. So
he wasn't in office.
True,
Yeah.
but Commodore didn't know that. And his orders were still valid. Whoever took his position, the next person would have said the same thing: take the Philippines, right? There he is, Commodore Dewey, watching the Spanish Navy go ahead and sink. Big news, completely victorious, almost no casualties. not that expensive, a splendid little war. The problem was that the Filipinos were so happy to get rid of the Spanish. They've been fighting them for years. They quickly saw when the Americans came that the Americans were pretty much going to do the exact same thing the Spanish did, rule over them. And so the insurrection which had been fighting against the Spanish quickly picked up again against the Americans. There was a very charismatic Filipino by the name of Aguinaldo. He led both struggles, against the Spanish and then against the Americans. And for a couple of years, there was a very nasty little guerrilla war between the United States Army and Marine Corps and the Philippine insurrectionists. It was, way more Americans died in that insurrection, that guerrilla war, than died in the actual Spanish-American War period, right? And finally, that was put down also. And the question is going to be this. Now that the Americans have won this battle, what are they going to do with the Philippines? What are they going to do with Puerto Rico? What are they going to do with Wake Island, Guam? What are they going to do with Cuba? Are they going to become parts of the United States, parts of the American empire, American possessions? Are they going to become independent countries that can do whatever they want? And that really is the question to ask with regards to what's going to happen after the war.
Commercial war and foreign adventure in general was McKinley's young Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt.
Theodore Roosevelt was a great believer in outdoorism, a great believer in activity. He was vigorous, you can imagine him sort of taking cold showers all the time. And he carried all this into his politics. He was a great believer in American power, in American imperialism, a great believer in war. War is one of the highest forms of human endeavor, he wrote.
With Roosevelt and others lobbying intensely for it, Congress declared war on Spain in April of 1898. Roosevelt left his job in Washington to join the campaign in Cuba.
Theodore Roosevelt organizes his old cowboy buddies from the West into the Rough Riders and goes to Brooks Brothers and gets a uniform made and gets out a big saber and goes down there and storms San Juan Hill.
It took the United States less than 3 months to defeat Spain in what one American official called a splendid little war. The spoils of war for the United States were the Spanish colonies of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The United States was now an empire.
And here's the question, right? Did the United States ever have a big debate about whether it should become an empire? No, it didn't. I mean, obviously, there were complicated reasons why some people like Theodore Roosevelt really wanted to aggressively move onto the world stage. There were those reasons. That's why Theodore Roosevelt was pushing for this kind of thing. On the other hand, there were plenty of people who really hated the idea of empire, hated the idea of getting into some kind of a nasty guerrilla war with people in the Philippines. People like William Jennings Bryan, liberal Democrats, people like Mark Twain. A lot of Americans basically would say this: it's a complete rejecting of our principles. We were founded on the idea that a country can make its own laws, it can be independent. And now we're going to play the same role as Great Britain in ruling over other peoples, the Filipinos, the Cubans, the Puerto Ricans. This is a complete rejection of our principles. It's the wrong thing. If you think we can be a dictator to other countries overseas and be a democracy at home, you're kidding yourself. It will not work. We'll blow our democracy up if we become an imperial power, right? But the problem is we're having that debate after we already have an empire. What to do? Maybe we should have had that debate before the war. Okay, this empire kind of fell into our lap before we had really thought too much about the whole thing. Okay, Lauren, why did the Japanese attack us on December 7th, 1941? The surprise attack at Pearl Harbor. Why did they attack us? The answer is they attacked us because we are a major Pacific power. We have a major role on the Pacific Ocean. They didn't like that, so they attacked us. We became a major Pacific power in the War of 1898 when we took the Philippines, right? And it's that simple. It has worldwide implications. Lee, if the United States becomes a major empire on the world stage in 1898, if World War I breaks out in 1914, if we're a major world power, can we remain out of this war indefinitely? Probably not. World War II breaks out, can the United States remain aloof from this if it is a major world power? No. The United States, for better or for worse, or probably for both, better and worse, is engaging the rest of the world in ways that it had never done before. So, Cuba. What happens to Cuba? Cuba does not become part of the United States, like Puerto Rico becomes a possession of the United States. Cuba becomes its own sovereign country, but Okay, you have the Teller Amendment and the Platt Amendment. The Teller Amendment basically says this during the war: we will not annex the United States. The United States does not want to go ahead and annex Cuba. It's not going to become our 45th state or whatever. The Platt Amendment is more complicated. This is passed after the war. The Platt Amendment says this. It says, number one, Cuba is going to be its own sovereign country with its own government, taking care of its own affairs. But, number one, it cannot go ahead and make major treaties with European powers. The Germans, the British, they're not welcome to go play in our backyard. The Caribbean Sea is going to be the American sphere of interest, right? The American Sea. So they can't do those things, and they have to agree to that. Number two, if Cuba seems like it's falling apart, if it seems like they're going to fall into a civil war situation and there's no domestic peace, the Americans hold the right to use their military to intervene in the affairs of the Cubans. And this will happen a couple times in the 20th century. When it seems like things are falling apart in Cuba, or if you're going to have an unfriendly government towards the United States, 90 miles away, the Americans will send the Marines in to go ahead and kind of clamp down. Three, the Cubans have to go ahead and give the southern part of their island to the United States as a naval base. This becomes known as the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base right here. And to this day, it's a major American military base in the region. And the Cubans have to go ahead and give that to us as part of the Platt Amendment in 1903. So, Amanda, the question is this: is Cuba an independent sovereign country that can run its own affairs? Answer is sort of. I mean, the Americans are not going to actually try and run this place. They have their freedom within certain conditions. The Philippines is going to be run by the Americans. It's going to become an American possession, right? In fact, there are certain people who sit there and bring Supreme Court cases saying, you know what, the American Marines, the American Army are basically torturing people, holding them under arrest without trial in the Philippines in this insurrection. This is a violation of the Bill of Rights. And the Supreme Court says no. And have this in your notes, it's called the insular cases. The insular cases is what the Supreme Court says people outside the United States don't have the same constitutional rights as people inside of it. Okay? They don't have a right to a trial. They don't have a right to face their accuser. They don't have free speech rights outside the United States in places like the Philippines.
Do you get a passport again for this American trip?
Okay, if you're an American and you want to go to the Philippines, do you need a passport?
Yeah.
I have no idea. Probably not. To go to Philippines, to go to Puerto Rico, you don't need one. To go to Cuba, Cuba's a full foreign country, so you would need one there, right? So there it is. It becomes part of the American empire. Cuba and this whole region. For example, if the Germans came down here and wanted to go ahead and put a colony inside the Dominican Republic or wanted to have a naval base in Mexico, that's not going to fly. Okay, this whole territory is the American sphere of influence. It's the American area. Outsiders are not welcome. It's part of the Monroe Doctrine, and you see that from there. Yeah?
What were the cases called?
The insular cases. Like, to be insulated, insular cases. Yeah.
Why Democrat didn't like the idea of expansion?
They didn't like the idea because they thought that by having us be in charge of the Filipinos, we'd have to put people in jail and shoot people. We'll have to be really heavy-handed.
But they liked the idea before of colonization. What changed? No.
I think that William Jennings Bryan probably would have liked to just kind of stay within our own country and not have that many dealings with people in other countries.
I think Democrats wanted to expand territory for slavery
In the
before.
1840s.
So they changed their mind after slavery was gone.
In the huge debate about what to do with the Philippines, people like William Jennings Bryan, Democrats, they basically said, we don't want to be involved in these places where we have to be the dictator. We have to rule other people. Let them run their own affairs. I think in the 1840s, they would have said basically, let's take California and bring our own people in there, and not basically be part of Mexico anymore at all. So they did kind of change that.
The voice of Democrat is no expansion, or is
the voice,
it just one of the
voice of the Democrats in 1900 was this: if you want to go ahead and have a democracy and civil rights at home, you can't be a dictator in the Philippines. And if you want to be in charge of the Philippines, if you want to have an empire, you're going to have to rule other peoples and not allow them to run their own affairs, and that's not democratic.
And Republicans?
Republicans would say this: who cares what the Filipinos say? This is about power. This is about the white man's burden to go ahead and civilize these people and bring American power. The strong do what they want, the weak suffer what they must. Yeah.
So kind of changed.
They kind of changed a little bit, yeah. Okay, so these right here are Christian missionaries. It sounds a little bit strange for us to hear them, but their idea was to move to China and help civilize these people.
Eva and her husband Charles had sacrificed a comfortable life in America